Today we are going to talk about the counterfeit drugs and how blockchain can actually help solve the problem. And I've actually structured the presentation in four parts. First, we'll talk about counterfeit drugs, what impact they have on the public health, as well as on the pharmaceutical industry. Then we'll briefly talk about supply chain. I believe most of you are aware, so I will not go into details, but give you a picture of the supply chain of the pharmaceutical industry. Then we'll talk about blockchain. Uh, I don't know how much you guys know about blockchain, so I've kind of drafted the presentation in a way wherein I will talk about the basics of the blockchain and then talk about how blockchain is used in supply chain. Then I have also prepared two use cases wherein the blockchain has been used in the pharmaceutical industry. One use case is in the UK. It started in UK. The other use case is in the US with FDA and NDSC assay. So that's about it. After each section, you're free to ask questions. Though I would prefer that we ask the questions in the end. We'll give about 15 minutes. I'll try to wrap up my presentation in 45 minutes. So in part one, I want to start with a poll. Christina, if you can bring the poll up so that we understand where to begin from, and I'll talk accordingly. So if you can see poll on your screens, please answer the questions, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so 54% are somewhat aware. That's good. Okay. When it can we see that again? It disappeared from my screen. When it comes to the number of deaths, okay, and the value is over 200 billion. All right. So let's start with this. A counterfeit drug is basically a product that is sold in the market with incorrect labels, or the worst case example is, and you can read about it on internet, that there were some cancer drugs in US which were counterfeit. And what they did was there is a concentration of API in those products, and either the concentration was not right or there was no API at all. And the whole irony of this situation is that the drugs or the medicines are supposed to save lives, but the counterfeit actually takes lives, right? So the questions that you had, these are the answers basically. So $200 billion, this is based on most number of articles that I've read online. Although WHO estimates about $431 billion per year. That's how much the counterfeit drugs market is. And the number of deaths also varies depending upon who is writing about this, but the most common number you would see on internet is about 150,000 deaths per year. So this is the scale of the issue. And I wanted to just show you that counterfeit drugs are on the top when it comes to the market of the illegal products. And you can look at this graph and you can see the counterfeit drugs are at the top with $200 billion value. Then there is prostitution and marijuana and all the rest of the stuff. So it is a big problem. And it seems that there is no solution because the supply chain is quite complicated. There are free trade policies amongst nations, and not all nations, mandate the requirement that the drug should be FDA approved. There are countries who do not import drugs that are not FDA approved. And that's where it gets easier for people to just sell counterfeit drugs. Now, the problem is so big that the Interpol started a program which is known as IGGH, Illicit Goods and Global Health Program. And they carried out an operation which was called as Operation Pangea 14, which was in 2014. That's why the number 14 comes up. In this operation, and I'll show you an image just after the slide, that you can look at the numbers here. The most number of counterfeit drugs are sold online. There are a lot of websites which are selling illicit products. And there are a lot of people who are actually buy online products. So this is one thing that you should be careful if you're going online to get some products which probably are cheaper, but may not be the right products or the correct products. They shut down about 113,000 online sites. They captured about $23 million of COVID-19 test kits, masks, antibiotics, and painkillers. So this is ongoing, and you can go to Interpol website and you can look it up, and you can see a lot of details on what they're doing and how many arrests have been made. And this is not just in developing countries. This is happening in Italy, this is happening in France, this is happening in US, uh, although it happens more in the developing countries, but it also happens in the developed countries. This is how they actually smuggle the counterfeit drugs. This is a picture taken from Operation Pangea from the Interpol website. You can go there and have a look. So in the bean cans, they're selling capsules, basically. Now, there is one aspect that we've spoken about is how it affects the public health, right? And how much money is being kind of lost to the pharmaceutical companies. And this is a paper that I was reading, and it's a very interesting table. You can look here that we have considered $200 billion, right? This is the sales per year. These people say that even though this number cannot be verified 100%, they have taken four estimates basically. $100 billion, $200 billion, a middle estimate, which is $300 billion, and what WHO says, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's about $430 billion per year. Now, on an average, every pharmaceutical company spends about 17% of their revenue in the R&D. And they are saying that if this money is lost, for example, $100, 17% is lost, and $17 is lost, the cost to develop new drug is about $2.6 billion. So here you would see $2.6. And you can see that if based on these estimates, how many new drugs that could be discovered if that money had gone into the R&D of the pharmaceutical companies, how many new drugs could be discovered every single year. So this is interesting. This is just the graph for the previous table. So if it's $100 billion sales for the counterfeit drugs, we are losing six new drugs every single year. If it's 200, we are losing 13. If it's 300, we are losing 19, 28. So obviously it is an immediate impact because people die. It also has a long-term impact on the public health because we are not able to discover new drugs due to the capital, right? And we would think that the incidences are coming down, but this is a graph from Pharmaceutical Security Institute. These are the number of incidents wherein we have caught counterfeit drugs, and you can see from 2011, the numbers are growing up. I think they came down in 2020 because of COVID, for no other reason. So it's a pretty dark picture, but that's the reality of the pharmaceutical industry right now when it comes to the drug supply chain. Now, I'll talk about supply chain. So we know that there is API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, or a raw material if it's biologics. Then we have the manufacturing facility, right? It goes to the manufacturing facility wherein they manufacture drugs. The drugs get either approved by FDA or not. It depends on which country we are talking about. Within the pharmaceutical manufacturing facility, you have processing, you have packaging, you have warehouse, and you have shipping. So there is a supply chain within the manufacturing facility, right? The drug is moving from one place to another. Once they finalize the product gets to the distributor or the wholesaler or the retailers. And from there it goes to, so they also have this same thing, receiving, warehousing, shipping. Then it goes to the hospitals or the pharmacies or the doctors and ultimately to the patients, right? I've simplified it, but that's kind of covers all the main players in the supply chain of the pharmaceutical industry. This is important recalls and returns. I don't know if you're aware about this, but there are incidents wherein a drug has been recalled from the market by the manufacturer. For example, they figured out or they came to know that there was something wrong with the product. And so they have to have this process in place wherein they tell all the suppliers that please do not sell the drugs further to the patients or the hospitals or the doctors. Please return it back to us. Now, without any, try to imagine that a company like Lonza or Novartis or Pfizer is telling a pharmacy by an email in India or somewhere that please send all the product back to us. It would not be so simple. It is not so simple and it is not so easy. And that's why the delay in returning or recalling the product can also be damaging to the public health. And that's where you would see that blockchain can actually help. And one of the use cases that I've covered talks about the recalls and returns, right? Now, one of the challenges in the supply chain itself is 30%, 30 in US alone, $35 billion of the products gets lost because of the temperature deviations. Now, those of you who do not know, all the biologics products needs to be kept at certain temperature through the entire supply chain. If there are temperature deviations, if the temperature goes up or high or low, then the recommended temperature, the product has lost its value. The product is of no use. And there is a lot of lost products because of that. Because it goes through supply chain, there is no measurement or there is no record and there is no monitoring of the temperature conditions as it goes through the supply chain. And 20%, 28% of the overall drugs in the market are biologics, which requires the temperature requirement. 25% of the vaccines reach their destination degraded because of incorrect shipping. And this is from WHO, 11% of the medicine sold in the developing countries are counterfeit. I would say that the number is much more, I would think, because I've read some other papers and the percentage is much higher. But I'm just taking the most reliable sources. So WHO says 11% of the medicine sold in developing countries are counterfeit. Now, before we begin blockchain, I would like to just understand how well you know blockchain so that I will talk accordingly. Christina, could you bring up the poll? It's just one question. Okay, that's okay, all right. So first, I'll just give you a brief history of blockchain. We all think that blockchain is Bitcoin, and it all started when in 2008 when the Bitcoin came. So that is not true. The first myth about blockchain is that it's cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is just one use case of blockchain, right? So although the whole hype, whether all the connotation about blockchain is about around cryptocurrency, but that is not the complete picture and not the correct picture. Blockchain is a technology. Cryptocurrency is one use case of the technology. And it actually started way back in 1980s and 1990s when people were trying to create blocks which cannot be tempered. I'll go into that a bit further down. Just want to give you a brief history. Then in basically in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto, a mysterious man, who we don't know who he is and where he is, He published a paper on blockchain technology and Bitcoin in 2009. The blockchain, it actually was the birth of Bitcoin. And then the whole hype began around the blockchain. So we have come a long way. You have heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. You've heard of metaverse and all of that stuff. These are all basically based on blockchain technology. So, so just one myth that I want to destroy here is that it's not cryptocurrency. Crypto is just one use case of blockchain, and we'll see how that is. One of the most, just a second. You can see the whole slide, right? You're not seeing the top toolbar.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, all right, thanks. So there are three kinds of networks, and it's important that we understand this so that you understand how blockchain or why blockchain is tamper-proof and why it's difficult to hack that. So the traditional network, the old way of things and the databases is centralized network. So there is a central entity that has all the data and it controls what happens with that data. And the rest of the people on the network are just relying on that central authority. That's a centralized network. Most of the apps that you would see online or that you use, for example, Grab, it's a centralized network, or Food Panda, or whoever. So they have all the data and they controls how you see the data or what happens with that data, right? Then comes the decentralized network, wherein there is not one central authority and there is no single authority that is controlling. So there are nodes, or there are people on the network, or the computers on the network, and the work is being distributed. And that's the Bitcoin is basically based on the decentralized network. So there is no single authority. Nobody is making a decision. The whole network is making a decision, right? All the data is stored on the various networks, right? So there is no, as you've heard, there is no client server model in that sense, right? And then there is distributed network, wherein, so there are two things here. One is the process, the computation. This is being distributed within these networks. In distributed networks, the computation is also distributed among the various computers, and they're all interconnected. So there is, again, so distributed is also a decentralized, but they're all connected. So they're all trying to serve a common goal. For example, Google. When you try to search something on the Google, there are thousands of computers who are trying to fetch you the data. So there is one common goal, although it appears that there is a central authority, but in essence, there is not. There are thousands of computers who are working to get you the results for which you have done the query, right? This is important to understand that in blockchain, there is no central authority. That is the first and important thing, that blockchain is decentralized, right? Now, the second important thing is the cryptography. And you probably understand this, and I just have put this to explain that if you want to encrypt hello, this is a plain text, and you do an encryption, this is how the encryption looks like, and we call it the ciphertext. And the way it is done is that there is a key, and that key does the encryption. So you've heard of private keys and public keys, and that's what they do. So for example, the secret or the text or anything that you want to encrypt is blockchain. The function says swap each letter in the secret with a new letter according to the key. The key is +2. So what the function would do is B +2 is BCD, L +2 is LMN, O +2 is PQ, and so on and so forth, right? So this is how the encryption works. And this is a very, very simplified example. That's not how simple encryption is, right? Now, what is a block and how the blocks are created and how the blockchain is created? So block could be anything, any information. Now we're talking about pharmaceutical, and I will get back to pharmaceutical supply chain. So let's say there is a product is created and it is pegged. We create a barcode or a QR code. which contains all the information. Manufacturer, who is the manufacturer, the lot number, the batch number, the expiry date, whatever information needs to go is in the QR code, right? Now, hashing is an important aspect of blockchain, and I've explained what hashing is. So what a block contains is the information, the hash of this block, the hash of previous block, and the timestamp. These are the four main things that each block would have, right? Let's understand hashing, and then I'll go into how the blocks are created. So hashing, as I explained, cryptography is basically a fingerprint, right? And fingerprints are unique. They can't be copied. They can't be duplicated. Every time a product changes hands, you know, meaning fingerprints change, the hashing will change. And you probably have heard about SHA-256, which is secure. This is the most commonly used hashing algorithm, which creates the encryption code you see here. So if the product changes hands, example, any change has happened, the hashing would change, and because the fingerprint has changed. And it is so sophisticated that if you, the one main thing is, no matter how long the text is, no matter how big the data is, it would always create a 256 bits of encryption code. So I've put this example here. If you see, the only thing we have changed here is this capital T have made this small t, and you can see the difference in the outcome. And that's what makes very difficult for people to play around with blockchain. One of the factors. You change anything, the hashing would change. And I will say why it's almost impossible to hack a blockchain, although it has been hacked, and I will tell you why, but it's almost impossible. Now, I told you that there is a block. This block would have hash. For example, hash is this number. The previous hash is 0 because this is the first block, right? The next block would have its own hash, which is this one, and it would have hash of the previous block, which is 12KZ, right? Then the next block would have a new hash of its own, this one, and it would have the previous hash of this block, right? And then the fourth block is a hash of its own hash, and then the previous hash. Now, let's assume you can see, right? You can see this. So each subsequent blocks contains the hash of the previous blocks. Now, if someone, the first block is called as the Genesis block because it does not have the previous block, and we name it as the Genesis block. Now, let's assume there is a malicious partner, someone who wants to hack in the blockchain and wants to change something in the blockchain, change the data or manipulate the data, right? What that person or a computer or network would have to do is, let's say he wants to change the data in this block. The hash, as you saw, if you make a small change, the hash would change, right? Once the hash changes, it does not match with the, right? And then the whole chain breaks down. The only way to do is to change the hash of every single block. Now, talk about Bitcoin, there are about million users, right? Million people have bought Bitcoin. You want to go and manipulate something, you will have to go into million computers and change million hash in single instance. That's why it's almost impossible. But if you have a supercomputer, and we know that the quantum computer is coming into picture, this would become possible, right? But generally, normally, it's not possible to hack a blockchain because of this reason, because you would have to go to every single computer. Remember, the decentralized and distributed, there is no single authority because the data is stored on every single node, on every single computer. So you'll have to go to every user, you have to hack into every computer and change hash on every single computer. That's why it's almost impossible to hack into blockchain. And that's why it's so secure, and that's why it's immutable. You can't change the data so easily. That's what makes this possible. First, the decentralization. There is no single authority. The data is stored on all the nodes, and then the hashing, which is cryptography and all that stuff. There are a couple of things in blockchain which I'm not going to touch upon, and you probably would have heard about them. One thing is mining, which is not relevant to the supply chain case we are discussing here. It's relevant in cryptocurrency. Proof of work and all of that stuff comes into play in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So I will not talk about them. Now, there are basically four types of blockchain networks. One is the public. There is no central authority, which is a Bitcoin, right? Then there is hybrid, wherein you can have a central authority, but still the data is it's still public. So there are other things I will talk about. And then there is this circle is permissioned. Permissioned and permissionless is, if you want to get onto Bitcoin, you don't need to ask anyone. You can just go and buy Bitcoin, right? There is no permission required. When we talk about supply chain, for example, this pharmaceutical industry, we would have to make it permissioned. Meaning, if any supply chain partner wants to get on board, he would need a pre-approval, whether from the manufacturer or the retailer or from anyone. Nobody just can go on the supply chain network, right? And that's why it is less decentralized in that sense, because the participants are pre-approved and have to be, because we can't allow any XYZ supplier to come on board and start selling the products. We'll have to ensure that they are legit. We have to ensure that they have a system in place that can tell us where the product is moving and how it is moving. So these are just two main kinds of permissionless and permissioned. When we talk about blockchain and supply chain, we're talking about permissioned blockchain. Then in permission, we have hybrid, private, and consortium. I will give you example of consortium blockchain, because consortium is basically, for example, IBM has created a blockchain supply chain solution or a platform, right? You get blockchain to, you get IBM to, give us the supply chain, although they will have all the technology with them. But then there are other partners, Pfizer, Merck, and the use case that I will talk about is between IBM, Merck, and FDA and Walmart. And so that's kind of a consortium. So there is a group which is controlling the supply chain. And these are just the differences between these four types of blockchain networks. One of the main disadvantage of the public is the scalability. You've heard about blockchain consumes a lot of energy, it consumes gas, and it's very energy consuming. Bitcoin consumes the amount of electricity that Singapore uses, for example, right? So, and that happens because of the things that I mentioned that I will not talk about is mining. Mining is basically you're trying to solve a puzzle to earn a Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. That's how you make Bitcoin. But in case of our blockchain supply chain, there is no mining required. And so there is no, the energy consumption of the blockchain is much, much lesser, right? And the blockchain we will use is the permissioned one, meaning all the supply chain, anyone who wants to get on board in the supply chain network will have to be pre-approved. There is another thing that I want to mention is the smart contracts. Now, you want to buy a property, you go to a retailer, or you go to a real estate agent, and the whole thing happens. In the smart contracts in the future, there would be no need for the middleman, meaning uh, the owner of the property puts a smart contract on the market and it says, these are my conditions. If you meet those conditions, the property is yours. The smart contracts works in the similar way. What you do is you put the business logic in a programming language, right? And that becomes a smart contract. It's a code, basically. The business is written in the code form. Now, in supply chain context, what it would do is it can release payments when the product is exchanging hands. For example, it moves from manufacturer to the distributor, right? And the distributor has passed it down to the further, supply chain retailers or pharmacies or hospitals. As soon as the product is sold, the smart contract can help release the payments automatically into the system, by making sure that all the conditions of the contract has been met. It's it's something that you can do initially, or it's something that you can add on later on. But right now, there are the technologies, the solutions, the use cases that I will talk about, they have this capability in them. And I will talk about the smart contracts a bit later on. So private permission blockchain, this is the solution for blockchain in pharmaceutical supply chain industry. So membership services so these are the services that are available in a blockchain. If you buy a blockchain technology, for example, a platform from Oracle or IBM, you would have these features available. So membership services required because you want people to apply to become a participant in the supply chain, right? Then you have smart contracts, I've talked about them. Ledger is basically the database which contains all the data. Then P2P network, I've talked about this, the peer-to-peer network, distributed and decentralized. Then there is governance, which you would need because the FDA would come into play if the blockchain is supply chain is considered. So FDA will have to be a part of it, and wherein the governance will come into play. And then there is privacy for sure, right? So this is, in short, the whole blockchain in supply chain would look like, or would have these features. So I was saying that as you exchange hands, the fingerprint changes and the hash changes of the block. And this is just a snippet of this. So there is a manufacturer, there is a barcode or a QR code. He scans it, that data gets recorded and becomes a block. Then it goes to logistics partner. He scans it, it gets on the block. Then it goes to warehouse. Every time a product code is exchanged, that timestamp and the data gets recorded in the blockchain. You can't tamper it for the reasons that I just mentioned. And this is how the blockchain and supply chain would keep the sanctity and make sure that the product is genuine and has not been tampered with, right? Uh, it, you will, in the end, what it would do is I would have an app. I would scan the code. If I'm a patient and I'm buying a drug, I would scan the code and it would tell me the entire history of its supply chain, where it came from, how many hands it has exchanged, and whether the product is genuine or not. Write down your questions and I'll I'll answer them later if you have any. Now I will talk about use cases. There is a company in UK, it's called as Pharma Trust, and it has actually created a platform. They call it the Zoe platform. So as I mentioned that it's a and I'll show you the screenshots of how the platform looks like and how it works. So at each stage of the journey, a secure encrypted log tracks each movement and every transfer so that shippers and sellers alike know at each stage what this drug is, where it came from, and where it has been every step of the way. It's a software as a service application, and this can be integrated with ERP databases, SAP databases, and all the different databases that the supply chain partners would have. There is the manufacturer, which becomes the admin. We did talk about consortium, wherein there is a group of people who actually controls the network. Manufacturer is one of them. Then there is partners, which is the regulatory bodies, FDAs and all that stuff. And then there are, of course, partners wherein the hospitals and patients and all that stuff. So they have kind of simplified into these three categories. So this is how their app looks like. This is, sorry, this is the consumer application, the application that people like you and I will have. And if there is a QR code on the product, I can scan it from and it will tell me whether the product is genuine or not. It's as simple as that. That's how the end result will look like. This is the partner application wherein they can put in the code and it can tell them the status of the drug, where it's been, where it's come from, where it has to go, and all that stuff. Now, this is how the application looks like. They call it the track and trace. And let's say manufacturer, you can see here, a lot is cleared, a batch is produced, and they scan it, for example. And if with every scan, you can see that there are 120 packets created. Then when the manufacturer how many packets have been shipped, because when you ship, you scan them again, and it can give you real time, almost real time status of what is happening with the product, where it is and where it's going. I was talking about that the platform can connect with different databases. This is just a snippet of how the data is actually coming into this platform, right? It's coming from the manufacturer, it's coming from the distributors, it's coming from the retailers. You need to connect the databases of these three different entities and bring the data back into this platform, and it does that. Now, this is the packet ID, the drug name, expiry date, status, retailer has sold it, packet is genuine, and this is how the blockchain information looks like, right? And at the end of it, you can see they created 120 packets. The pharmacy has sold 120 packets. And it can show you where it has gone, how many places it has gone. So that's how the blockchain in supply chain actually looks like. Every step of the way, you know where the drug has been, it has been tracked and traced. They, one of the things that I was talking about is temperature deviation, and that's where the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0 and sensors and all of that stuff will come into play, wherein all the supply chain partners can install the temperature transmitters, and the temperature transmitters can transmit the data uh, regularly, and we'll be able to see whether the temperature deviations has taken place or not. And that's, you can see the same thing will happen here. You'd be able to see in real time what's happening with the product, and you'd be able to save a lot of products, a lot of money, and all of that stuff. There are two other features that they have is you can optimize routes and you can coordinate assets. If there are in different parts of the country where the product requirement or demand is more, there is a centralized kind of database, or a place where you can go and see what's happening, you know, with the product and where the demand is more, and you can ship and transfer the products as the demand is created. You would also be able to see, as I mentioned, because one of the partners for the regulatory bodies, you would be able to see whether the drug has been approved by FDA or not. And you can get a detailed report on what FDA did, if they did anything, right? Now, this is one of the pilots that IBM did with Merck, Walmart, and KPMG was the consultant. And they kind of did the blockchain interoperability pilot. I will go into a little bit of technical here. This is how the solution looks like. So IBM has their own, as I mentioned, that IBM, Oracle, they have their own blockchain platforms and technology. They have this platform layer, which they call it the food trust, right? There is Merck, there is pharmacy, there is distributor, and the blockchain network is between them. They are using Hyperledger Fabric. This is one of the blockchain uh, technologies that is there. Ethereum, you probably would have heard. And these are the technologies that you can build on various kind of solutions. Then this is the solution layer, where is in the GS1 connector, converter, provenance, and trace API. This is how you connect with the SAP, ERP, and all the databases, the different databases they have. And then this is the user interface. So this is the web app. This is what the consumer would see. This is what the pharmacy would see. This is what the supply chain partners would see. So event actions, product security, and drug provenance. And they have these features. And these are the data standards that they use. EPCIS is Electronic Product Code Information System. This is basically created by the GS1, the body, right? Global standards. And EPCIS is the electronic product, the barcode or the QR code, what kind of information, how the information has to be arranged, so that there is a standard way of putting information that is similar for everyone. So this is just what they used. And so this is the manufacturer. They have received, shipped, they've verified the product details, the quality analyst, and the serialization analyst. He checks the provenance of the drug. And then there is the dispensing facility. So there are three user interfaces basically: event actions, product security, drug provenance. It was a successful pilot. I have added the link of the paper that is available. You can just Google it. So these are the two drugs that they tested. So Merck did this: commission, packing, shipping. The distributor received them, the pharmacist received them, and then they sold it. There is one more slide wherein I will talk about. No, that's it. Or maybe there is one more. No, that's it. So I think I'm almost on time, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to. So basically, that's it. So there is various ways of using blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is not cryptocurrency. It can be used to do many things. Supply chain is one of the best use cases of blockchain. And this pilot was successful with FDA, and the paper said itself that the 80% of the pharmaceutical companies are actually investing in blockchain. Pfizer has invested in MediLedger, uh, and they're working on implementing blockchain in their supply chain. And I would now leave open the table for questions.
Thank you, Sayog. That was very interesting. Hope everyone learned something new. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to post it in the chat, or please unmute yourself and ask Sayog directly. I have a question, Sayog. Just pardon the ignorance, but in terms of like rolling out blockchain technology in the drug supply chain, I mean, what's the progress so far then? Because you're talking about pilots and percentages.
One of the main problems I would say is the interoperability uh, and the investment that goes with it, right? Uh, I would say that they want to invest in it. They're not doing it because the whole supply chain is probably not ready technologically. Pfizer can do it or Novartis can do it, but they have to look at the entire supply chain and see whether they can kind of pull into it, right? So it takes a lot of money, first thing. The second thing is the technology aspect, whether the entire supply chain is ready with the kind of the infrastructure that is needed. And if you really think about any drug company, they sell drugs all around the world. It's not just one or two country. And to have a solution that can give them, so they can't have a different solution for India and a different solution for Singapore and a different technology for UK, for example, right? They would have to have a same set of technology and that can provide. And I think that's scalability is one of the problems. Big manufacturing companies are investing in it. I would say that it would take about 5 to 7 years to see some traction and see this whole thing come into play, and you would be able to see whether drug is genuine or not. Now, I'm in India, and I go to the pharmacy and I can get any drug I want. I don't need to show any prescription. So this is another factor, right? In Singapore, you can't do that. So it also depends on the government bodies, whether how strict they are, how regulated the drug selling is, and that also comes into play. So we say that the people who are selling counterfeit drugs are part of the problem, but we also would say that we are not checking, right? People are buying online, and nobody wants to check whether the product is genuine. Just because it is cheap, we are buying it, right? So I think it goes both ways, and we'll have to see how the governments will play, and how regulated this will become in each country. And the more regulated a country is, I think the blockchain would go there first because it can help them regulate more or
Mm.
correct it. Yeah.
But and then in terms of the implementation and the cost involved, I mean, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Depends how complex or large your supply chain is. But I would not say that it's unbearable amount. these are billion-dollar companies. It's probably 100 million, 50 million kind of investment.
Right.
Uh, One of the reasons is because they are not building the technology. They can just buy something from IBM.
Mm,
That's it. Like Pharma Trust, it's a
mm,
platform. It's a SaaS application. You just pay them on the usage or how whatever their service model is. But they don't have to build anything on their own. They just need to purchase the platform. For example, they buy Microsoft, right? They,
mm.
Microsoft. It would become like that.
So it'll become as common as like serial numbers, track,
Yeah,
trace, and all that, those kind of current systems.
correct.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions? Got 12 minutes where everyone's kind of thinking about it.
Was it too technical? Less technical? I don't know.
Well, it depends on your level of how technical you are as what your background is, right? But it, for me, it's quite technical, but
I
it's
can, I can, if there was a part here which you did not understand, and because this is the most important bit, the other bit
mm.
is easy. Hash is fingerprint. Just remember this. And every time you move the product from one place to another, the fingerprint changes. And the previous fingerprint is imprinted on the new block, right? And I've simplified it very much. There are
So how,
Merkle trees. There
yeah.
are Merkle trees, and I can go into the IT stuff, but I don't think that makes sense. But this is how I would remember it. Every time the product changes hands, the fingerprints are imprinted on it. The previous fingerprints are there. So if anyone wants to change anything, he will have to change both the fingerprints.
So
And
how
that,
does that translate to a production batch then? It's got some kind of identifier.
yes. So when you start a product, you create the lot number to create the product ID. That's where the EPCIS I was talking about. Just give me a sec.
So this is how everything is tracked.
Yes, within the manufacturing facility. So you have this lot number. So wait, I will open the paper because they have more data. Uh,
And like you say, you can't hack into it. So there's no like security risk.
no, you can't hack into it. First, you can't hack into it because it's a permissioned network. So nobody can just jump into the network and start doing something. They will have to take permission to get onto the network.
So that's why you would, if you have an authentic product, that you know that it's authentic, that it hasn't, the records haven't been tampered with.
Yes.
Okay. Amazing.
No questions?
Does anyone else have any comments, questions, examples? Otherwise, we're going to let Sayog go because you're not feeling too great right now. Hopefully, you'll recover soon and enjoy the rest of your stay in India. So, thank you everyone for joining us. If there are no questions, I think we'll let you go, Sayog.
All right. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And I hope that everyone's learned something from this session. If you have any questions, please let us know. We're happy to forward them on. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again at our next Tech Tuesdays.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda and Christina. Thanks very
Thank you,
much.
Sayog. You take care, and we'll see you back in Singapore.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.